What's up guys, Houndish here, and today let's talk about primary weapons going into this new balance patch 2.5.2, because things feel pretty good right now for primaries in PvP. And this is going to be some first impressions about the state of weapons and what seems to stand out right now. It's worth saying first off that as always within a week or two the meta will start to settle, and it's likely that there'll be a couple of power players as always, but I do feel like in general Bungie have brought primaries closer together. You know, it kind of feels like you can have more success with a wider selection of weapons, which is always good. Of course, people are trying different things in the game right now, so like I said, it takes a little bit of time for that to kind of settle down, and you know, the real key players will start to pop out. But for now, let's get into how it's looking from my perspective. So we'll start out with pulse rifles. The two notable changes were firstly the nerf to the Clever Dragon varieties rate of fire, as well as the mag size reduction, but secondly we also saw a buff to the rate of fire on high impact pulse rifles, so that's things like the messenger spare change. Let's briefly talk about Clever Dragon though. So I used it for a couple of games last night, and it's safe to say it was hit pretty hard compared at least to its former self. That's not to say it's not still good, because it is, it's okay. The rate of fire change is very noticeable, but it still has a reasonable time to kill, and the ease of handling is still very much there. However, I feel like the Hawksaw or Blind Perdition archetype in comparison is now a much more rounded weapon in terms of rate of fire versus damage, and this is something that's always been really good on that Hawksaw family of pulse rifles, and I think it's going to be a better option versus the Clever Dragon or Grasp of Malak archetype right now in my opinion. I think we'll still see people using the high rate of fire pulse rifles, but their popularity is certainly going to drop after this patch. To touch on the low rate of fire pulse rifles, these had a rate of fire buff of 5.3%, which you can definitely notice when using the weapons. Currently they seem to be performing pretty nicely. 2 burst kills are of course still possible with this archetype, but there haven't been any changes to the damage, so dependent on your rolls, they are still inconsistent to a degree on this front. But it's also worth saying that I don't really have any outstanding rolls on these archetypes of pulse rifles, so I don't really have the best examples to go by. I can safely say though, they do feel like much more of an option currently in PvP. Are they going to be the optimum choice like when the Messenger reigned supreme in year 1? Personally, I don't think so. They are certainly more viable right now than they've been for a long while, but I think other archetypes are going to stand out in the emerging metagame for PvP. So the Hopscotch and Nerwin's Mercy archetype is the one we've missed, and this is an interesting one because these things have remained to be actually pretty good throughout year 2 and 3, but have simply been outshone by the high rate of fire options. Right now in PvP, Hopscotch Pilgrim feels very, very good. Like I said before, this isn't because they've been buffed or changed in any respect, but it's because the other things have changed around them and some space has opened up for this archetype to perform a little bit better. With the higher flinch and rate of fire pulse rifles knocked down a few pegs, these genuinely feel pretty awesome right now. Again, it's mostly a case of what's being toned down changing the state of play for these particular weapons, but I feel like personally the Hawksaw archetype along with the Hopscotch Pilgrim archetype are probably going to be the key players for pulse rifles across the board. Of course, I may yet be wrong on this front, but I feel like when you throw those max rate of fire Clevers and the low rate of fire Parthian shot types into the mix as well, the way that primary is kind of a balance right now for pulse rifles, any of the pulse rifles is genuinely a pretty reliable option. I would just bet that the potent types of pulse rifle are probably going to be those 2 middle of the family types which I previously mentioned. Moving on to hand cannons though, they feel absolutely ridiculous again. In medium or optimum range, they are very snappy. The change to initial bullet accuracy has really returned these things to year 1 status in terms of target acquisition. When you go for the head, they just stick. They feel really good. The popular hand cannons like IS Luna and Palindrome are still absolute kings inside of their effective range. But the range drop-off is pretty noticeable. At longer medium ranges in general, you'll see this drop-off in damage start to happen pretty quickly. However, with the changes to flinch and weapons like Clever Dragon, which absolutely melted before, right now it feels like you can more easily close those gaps and get into those optimum ranges for those kind of hand cannon engagements. So on the most part, I feel like hand cannons are in a pretty good spot right now. Hawkmoon is one weapon which I tried out and was very surprised. It feels like this thing could be pretty potent potentially. The initial accuracy change has made it very easy to hit your first shot with Hawkmoon, and because it has that lower stability, it feels like you get more bullet magnetism and that reduced bloom when you're firing the weapon fast, which is pretty good and definitely is beneficial with something like Hawkmoon. I genuinely feel like Hawkmoon is coming back. Although I'm also hearing reports that the last word is doing very good right now, again because of that initial accuracy. It's not going to be at that year 1 status in general, but the word on the street is that it's hitting its shots very cleanly to start the engagement, which is of course very important for something like the last word, and then just melting. So again, on the whole, I feel like the hand cannon change for now feels really good, and some of those exotics and different types of hand cannons may pop out a little bit more with these changes. So for now, I'm pretty happy to say that they feel good. Onto auto rifles though. I've seen plenty of them in PvP since the patch. In general, the precision damage modifier has been increased from 1.25 up to 1.3 times damage, which is going to help you when you're hitting your crits. You won't see higher damage numbers because of this change, but for low rate of fire auto rifles on the most part, you're going to see 1 more damage, so no actual time to kill change right there, but they do feel good. So if we look at either the max rate of fire doctrine types or the Vision Stone Hakon's variety, they feel a little bit better at the moment than they did, and part of this is because people are using different stuff. There's a wider variety of weapons being used, and you're not being shut down by those same strong weapons necessarily over and over again. The Hakon's variety of ARs were already really pretty good, so they continue to feel nice, but in the case of the low rate of fire auto rifles, they've had a damage increase of 2.5%, and they do feel pretty nice. Particularly Suros Regime with Focus Fire and Genesis Chain are looking pretty good right now. The same can be said though for any of your lower rate of fire autos like Shadow Price and things like that. They're going to feel pretty decent. I still don't believe that Suros or the archetype in general is going to become potent like they did in year 1. They do good damage, the time to kills and stuff like that are pretty nice, but as always we're back to that problem where higher damage burst or semi-auto weapons are generally the better option because they can serve high damage while moving in and out of cover, whereas you have to kind of generally persist in an open gunfight if you're using an auto rifle. So it doesn't feel like there's going to be an auto rifle meta or anything like that, but nonetheless I think we're going to see a lot more of these weapons used in PvP and much more variety, which is always good. Auto rifles, you know, are still effective and fun weapons to use. So finally, that leads us on to scout rifles, and of course there have been no major changes to these apart from that high caliber rounds now affects them more. Bungie didn't specify exactly what that means, but they said for scouts, autos and hand cannons, high cal is now performing as intended. I don't really have much maths on what this may mean in terms of scout rifles in particular, but I can say that much like the other primaries right now, they feel pretty good to use. Of course, some of the biggest contenders were things like Clever Dragon, and with less flinch and high rate of fire weapons going around currently in PvP, scouts do in general feel pretty nicely positioned at the moment, not that they were ever bad, you know, before. For me, the key thing that I'm taking from this patch right now in terms of primaries is that they've without a doubt been brought closer in line with each other. It genuinely feels like there is more opportunity for variety in primary weapons. You'll have more success with a wide variety of weapons in the Crucible, which is certainly welcomed and really seems to have been the idea behind the patch. You know, Bungie spoke about surgical changes, and in a preliminary way, it feels pretty good. But like I said, it's going to settle down a bit yet. These are kind of preliminary impressions that I have from around 10 hours of PvP since the patch. So we will have to see what happens over time, but to summarize right now, for pulse rifles, there's way more variety right there. I think the Hawkscore and Hopscotch family are likely to be the potent weapons, but the low rate of fire pulses are also pretty nice right now if you have good rolls. With hand cannons, they feel way more reliable in medium and close ranges, which is good. They're very sticky, they seem to hit their shots more reliably, and on top of the popular legendaries, I feel like things like Hawkmoon and the Last Word are really going to pop again. Hawkmoon being my favourite in particular right now because it just felt so out of touch for a long time, and it feels like it's pretty nicely positioned, so that's really nice. People are actually using auto rifles as well. I think high caliber Vision Stone or Hakon's type autos are going to see a bit more use, and the Suros Regime autos will also be way more common for the moment. Like I said, I don't think an auto rifle meta is really ever on the cards now, but usage is almost certainly going to be increased even over time, so that's always nice. And scouts are mostly unchanged, but there are more opportunities currently to equip a variety of different scout rifles and for them to feel generally pretty good. As far as the change to high caliber rounds on auto, scouts and hand cannons, I think some specific testing needs to be done to see, you know, exactly what that is doing, but for now, these have been my impressions and experiences of the patch so far, guys. So let me know down below what you think. What primary weapons have you been using inside of PvP, or any other thoughts that you have on the patch in general? If you have enjoyed this video, a like below is always super appreciated. appreciated, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit subscribe if you enjoy the content to keep up to date with everything Destiny related. For now though, thanks a lot for watching guys, and you have fun in the Crucible.